I'm going to add 3 minutes to this so that it doesn't beep on you.
Okay, great.
Three.
Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here in Raleigh. I work for Telemetry Hub, which is a new platform launched by Scout APM, if you're familiar with Scout. We've got a good presence here in Raleigh. We've got a WeWork office. I am from East Tennessee, so I'm very happy to see other humans because I live in basically a cow field, so this is awesome. And thanks for joining me. I'm going to do kind of a look back on monitoring and then a look into what observability is today, and then a quick look at one of my favorite open source projects. And hopefully you'll come out of this with a little bit of interest to kind of dig deeper. That's kind of the goal. So we're going to start with why do we care? We care because, we were talking about burnout earlier. We don't want to burn out. We don't want our nights and weekends to be totally occupied with keeping things up and running, especially systems that we don't understand. We don't have access to the information we need to support them. We want to be working on the things that will be moving us forward, the things we enjoy working on. Troubleshooting, debugging can be fun, but it's not something we want to do all the time. It also does not make our C-levels happy. It's very expensive, and it doesn't move the company forwards necessarily. It keeps you in this treading water state where you're just trying to put out fires and keep things alive, and it's not always a fun place to be in. So thinking back to where monitoring really started, it started with monolith systems. You need to know, is your system up or down, essentially, is kind of the first point, right? Are we alive? Are we not alive? When you think about kind of like V1, can people see my site or can they not? And we've evolved since then. Now there's a lot more going on, a lot more complexity, but basically this is where we started. Are we good or are we not? Red or green? And that's really where performance monitoring came from. I'm going to date myself by saying that I had this pager at one point in my career. I don't know if anybody else is familiar with this, but yeah. I still have like anxiety dreams where I hear that tone and I wake up in a panic and I'm like, oh my God, server's full of log files. I have to do something immediately. And it's just like not super fun. But anyways, this was a good way to alert people that something needed to happen, that somebody needed to do something. And it was enough. It was the right solution for the systems that we were working on at the time. We could, see trends. So latency is growing. We need to look at something. We can see load. We can see error rates, that sort of thing. It was the information that we needed at the time. So why do we need anything else now? The answer to that question is distributed systems. So distributed systems have brought a lot of great things to our lives. All of the abilities, scalability, reliability. It's a more efficient way in a lot of cases to develop software, to release software. It's more modular. It can make onboarding new engineers easier. There's not as much to have to hold in your brain as one individual. But with that added complexity and all of those relationships across systems and across services, it's harder to monitor. You can no longer just say, are we healthy or are we not healthy? Are we up or are we down? There's a lot more to it than that now. We've also been introduced to ephemeral resources. So what happens when you're auto-scaling and shrinking your infrastructure? If something happened and where it happened is no longer there, that's a difficult thing to be able to understand and troubleshoot potentially. And again, this has brought a lot of good things. That being able to auto-scale, being able to use these ephemeral resources is awesome. But when something goes wrong, it's just a little bit harder to troubleshoot and to totally understand. So just a quick talk about metastable failures. The super fun state that a system can get into where it cannot recover, but things still look like they're okay when you're looking across your services. If you're looking at your monitors, call it like a watermelon dashboard, everything's green, but behind the scenes something is really red. And it's going to be hard to figure out what that is. by just looking at a dashboard, a monitoring dashboard. Because potentially most of your services are good to go. They're sitting and waiting, but something back there has fallen down and we don't know what it is. And we didn't think to look for it, so we never set up the right kind of monitoring or the right kind of observability for that particular service. So we know that we need to step up our game when it comes to monitoring. So what do we do next, right? We've got all of our monitors in place. We feel pretty comfortable. We get paged and sometimes we don't know what to do. Like, how can we make that better? That is observability. That's where observability comes into play. And I'm going to call it, the answer to everything. And then I'm going to tell you that it doesn't matter if we call it observability or if we call it monitoring or if we call it advanced monitoring, semantics. But on paper, and if you Google observability in systems, what you'll see is that it's the ability to understand the internal state of a system by looking at the output. Now, one thing that I want to note is that we always talk about observability and we talk about monitoring. And you'll notice the ability on the end of observability, it's a state of being of your system. So it's not just, are we monitoring it or are we not? But it is this system designed in a way so that we can have insight into it. And that's something I really want everybody to keep in mind. It's almost a cultural mindset. When you're building systems and when engineers are writing code and when we're thinking about business cases and who our stakeholders are, who needs that insight and can they get it easily? So for me, this is a lot about breaking down knowledge silos so that people can have access to the information that they need to do their jobs efficiently and to not have big roadblocks in collaboration and communication. So again, monitoring, doesn't it do that? It can. So that's one of those places where this gets a little bit muddy because there's like observability tools and then there's observability as the state of being of your system. Monitoring might be enough. If you're supporting a fairly simple system, the infrastructure is pretty straightforward. You, as an individual who's kind of responsible for the health of the system, you know where everything is, what's going on. You may just need monitoring. That may be enough. You may not need to go hog wild into instrumenting and collecting telemetry out of every little piece of your system and infrastructure. That could be overkill and a huge waste of your time. If monitoring gives you the answers that you need, your system is observable. It doesn't matter that you haven't bought a tool called observability tool or whatever. If you can answer the questions that you will be presented of your system, it is observable. So, obviously a little muddy, but again, the outcomes are what we care about here, the answers, the ability to resolve issues permanently and have the information to do that without having to rely on, prior knowledge or subject matter experts somewhere who know something because they've been at a company for 50 years. Observability isn't done. So it's not something where you're suddenly observable, you've deployed an agent and now observability is good to go. That's not how it's going to work. You want to keep evolving this as your systems and infrastructure evolve. It also doesn't have to be all or nothing. So one of the things that I hear a lot when I'm talking to people in the industry is that, we have been using these monitoring tools for my tenure at this company, and moving into this new world of observability sounds really overwhelming. I'm not ready to rip stuff out that I've spent years maintaining and implementing. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can introduce a little bit of observability in areas that are maybe a little bit of a black box for you. Try it out. There's a lot of different great tools and open source projects. I'll talk about one of them. But it doesn't have to be like all or nothing. You're only traditional monitoring or you're only this new modern monitoring for distributed systems. That's, I think, a bit of a misconception that can be a little bit off-putting, and it kind of makes people want to put this priority on more of a back burner instead of thinking like, we should do this now. And I would always say that the right time to start thinking about your observability strategy was yesterday. And if you didn't do it yesterday, you want to do it today. You don't want to catch yourself without the information you need and then be thinking about, okay, how do we now retrofit this into a system that wasn't architected to be transparent. So again, doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it, modern monitoring, advanced monitoring. It's really about the right tools and the right design for your team and your company. So thinking about the origin of this term observability, I think Charity Majors from Honeycomb was the first one to start using observability to be applied to this sort of insight into the system. But it actually comes from the theory of control systems from 1960. So this is not a new idea. Originally looking at human systems, so how human beings interact with each other, a lot easier to understand the outcomes of those relationships than trying to wrap your head around all the nuances of individuals and how they interact with each other. So kind of an interesting start to this term. So if we want to be able to understand what's going on in our systems by measuring the outputs, we should just collect all the outputs possible, right? Like just get everything that our systems can produce. We're going to get it. We're going to store it somewhere. Maybe we'll organize it later. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll think about the strategy of how we're generating that data. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll put it in one place. Maybe not. And then when something goes wrong, oh boy, now you're sifting through a lot of data. And you can get yourself into this state where you're data rich but information poor, and that's not valuable. The time and money spent on generating, collecting, and then trying to use this data that you've amassed is not valuable. It's not the best way to do this. So, when I think about, logs obviously have great information in them, but we want to think about the strategy around it. We want to think about centralizing our telemetry data so that it's useful and we can correlate it and it, can make sense to people who weren't involved in the initial creation and design. So really, when we talk about observability, again, what we want to be able to do is answer unknown unknowns, the questions that we did not think to ask. And that's where the observability kind of encompasses the monitoring. So monitoring is, these are things that we expect to potentially be problematic. We know that we want to keep an eye on a response time. We know we want to keep an eye on an error rate. Observability is going to give you some of that insight into something that you didn't know could possibly go wrong. And that helps you think about not only is your system up or is it down, but is it deployed in the best way possible? Is your infrastructure the right infrastructure and the right configuration to support your system? Are you spending a lot for resources you aren't using? That's the sort of thing that traditional monitoring might not be able to answer for you. And thinking about reliability, if everything's green, but your users are having a weird experience, it's still not good. It doesn't matter. If somebody says something's going wrong and you're like, well, not on my dashboard, that's not a good answer, and that's not something that, is going to solve the problems for your customers. So again, can I just buy a tool? You can. There's a lot of observability tools out there. My company is one of them. I'm sure that your inboxes are inundated with, observability. You need observability. You need this observability tool for logging. You need this observability tool for your metrics. You need this observability tool for, X, Y, Z. But I just want to emphasize that it's an investment. It's going to take some work. And you don't need to buy, the biggest and most expensive thing if that's not what your company needs. I think that sometimes we get a little bit of pressure from potentially our higher ups or somebody who had a good experience with the tool at one point and they're like, oh, I used this at my last company, we're going to use it here, without really thinking about whether or not it's applicable. It could be too expensive. It could be too much to maintain and implement. You could end up with a huge invoice for something that nobody uses because it hasn't been implemented well, or people don't understand it, or we never got around to finishing the configuration of it. I'm sure we've all seen tools like that. So just be very pragmatic when you're thinking about how you want to achieve observability within your systems and applications. So again, what do we care about this? So I think about an experience at a company that I worked at where we had a legacy service that only one person understood. He'd been at the company for 20 years, the rest of us had been there for like 5 or fewer. And anytime anything went wrong with that service or a request for that service, the answer was, go ask George. And if George wasn't available, it would restart the service. So that's not a great way to feel confident about the reliability. Like every time I restarted that service, I was like, please God, let it come back up. Like, what am I going to do if it doesn't come back up? Like, I have no idea how to actually fix this or what it's actually doing. It's a technology that I do not know. All I know is that my runbook says, when this happens, call George, and if not George, restart service. Not great, right? What I needed was the ability to get some information. And that would give me a place to at least try to make some educated decisions about how I could potentially resolve it. The best thing would have been for somebody to fix it so that it would have stopped doing that. But beyond that, just being able to have some information about it would have been really, really useful. It would have meant that maybe when I came to George, I had some idea what was going wrong instead of just being like, that thing is happening, that happens sometimes, please fix it. I mean, not a fun place for him to be in, job security, I suppose, but I think we've all ended up in that place where we're supporting one thing, we're the only one who knows it. It's not fun, and it's not a good place when you're trying to support something at 3 a.m. and something's fallen over. The other reason we should care about this is for better collaboration. So I'm looking at this from a product management perspective now, and I see in the observability approach that we've used at Telemetry Hub, I have a lot more information available to me now than I did 15 years ago when I was actually supporting systems. And for me, this is what I wanted and what I needed. You know, I don't have to go ask somebody for access to data to be able to answer questions about my system. I have, the ability to drill deeply into insights about our customers, our applications, our infrastructure, and it's all in one place, and it is designed in a way that gives me information that I need as a product manager, but also is deep enough for our engineering team to use to make improvements and kind of plan what we're going to be doing as an organization. I really think that the democratization of data across an organization can really make everybody's lives better. It can let your support team, your frontline support team, have a better starting point for troubleshooting issues. It lets your product management team understand why you might need to invest in technical debt or spend time working on your infrastructure. It really just kind of gets you past the, well, this is a fact because I've said it. You have data to back it up. And in product management, everybody is always talking about data-driven decisions. They're usually talking about usage analytics, but for me, this is the sort of data that I also want to have available when I'm making decisions. And I know that my engineering team feels the same way. And along with that, the increased context is something that is just kind of invaluable when you're thinking about how your teams communicate with each other. A lot of times there's a bit of a push and pull between like product and engineering or engineering and design, and it's a natural tension that I think is good because it makes you build the best thing possible. But without the context of like, how do all of these things relate to each other, it's really easy to get frustrated. I don't know if anybody's seen this YouTube video, but it's amazing. Watch it. If you just Google microservices comedy, it's a PM, and I've been in his shoes listening to an engineer explain all of the relationships of this system and why they can't do the thing the PM wants. And the PM's like, Jesus, it's such a simple thing, and I've been guilty of that. And without being able to understand what's happening, your PM never really gets it, Your C-level doesn't get it. They don't understand. Like, on a piece of paper, it's like, can't you just sort those 5 million rows? Like, I can see them all. I can page through them. Why can't I sort them by any particular field? And trying to explain why that is so difficult is just a lost cause. But if you had data that you could show and they could have some insight into that system, it would be such a better conversation. Good luck. It can be really, really tricky. So having this data available and not just kind of like locked away in an ivory tower is a really great way to kind of bring everybody onto the same page and not leave anybody feeling like they're in the dark. I know as a product manager, I don't like feeling like I'm in the dark. I like to know what's going on. I know that my managers feel the same way, and everybody in my company has access to our application insight, and it's really made things a lot faster and easier and more efficient, in my opinion. And this will help you reduce your mean time to understanding. I'm not saying resolution, overall it will, but this will get you to the point of being able to fix something faster. You're not going to be spending a lot of time, digging through log files, asking people what happened last time, this sort of thing. If you have better information available to you, you can understand the problem quicker and spend less time sleuthing, throwing hypotheses at the wall, looking back through Slack to see if anybody's ever seen this happen before, that sort of thing. And that's great, right? Like, we've all been in a place where we're like, oh man, I think this happened last year. Let me see what I can find. Even better if I just have it right in front of my face and I can see what's going on and I can work to resolve it right now. And then think about resolving it permanently so that it doesn't happen again. So when you do get that 3 a.m. page, maybe the next day after you've slept it off and you're no longer frustrated by that call, think about whether or not you could answer these questions. If you can't answer these questions, your system may not be transparent enough. So who is being impacted? If something goes wrong and I get paged, can I tell who that cares about this is being impacted? Is it my largest customer who just onboarded 500 people halfway across the world and that caused load issues and this is a big deal and we need to think about it now? Or is it one of my offshore QA testers doing some testing that's caused some weirdness and I got paged by it and I don't care? If you don't know that, you have to go into that mode of we need to fix this now. You don't need to fix everything now. You don't need to always address everything that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you have to know the severity of it to make that decision. You have to know who is impacted. You have to know how serious it is. Otherwise, you can't make that decision and your only other choice is to try to address it immediately. You have the information to tell you what you need to do to resolve the issue. Where is the problem? In my distributed system, where is it? Is it in a particular region? Is it in a particular cluster or pod? Is it localized geographically some way? Looking at aggregated monitoring isn't going to tell you that. And then again, when do these issues start? Why do we end up in this state? It's information that you need to know to not only resolve the issue, but make sure it doesn't continue to happen. So I'm going to talk about the 3 pillars of observability. Again, these are a little more tactical and a little less about making your system transparent and keeping that mentality. But these are 3 pieces of telemetry that can help you build a more transparent system. The metrics people are very familiar with, statistical information in aggregate. They're cheap to store, which is wonderful. If you want to be able to look back. They're not expensive to store and work with. The problem with metrics is that when you have something that you want to drill down on, that underlying data is gone, and it's too late unless you've collected it somewhere else. So a great way to page somebody and let them know that something's gone wrong, but not a great way to have that really granular insight of what's happening, that low-level look at what's happening. The distributed traces are kind of the golden child of observability when we're thinking about this modern idea of being able to trace a request from start to finish. And this differs from traditional detailed tracing because it shows you all of the hops across your entire infrastructure of a request from start to finish. So instead of saying I have a trace of what this particular service did, or I have some information about what this service is doing, I can understand that this service used this resource on this particular pod, made this request, came back with this result, and I can tie it all back in a nice look at the hierarchy of all of those requests that respond along the way and what happened. So not inexpensive, I think when we think about observability, a lot of people think about the cost, and that's very valid. It is a lot of data to be able to do this sort of thing, but it is very valuable when you're trying to diagnose and troubleshoot. So this is a quick look at the platform that I work on, Telemetry Hub. This is a look at the hierarchical view of the span data that makes up the trace. The nice thing about it, you can kind of see here, this is demo data from the Open Telemetry project, but we're moving across resources, we're moving across technologies. When you drill into the span, you can see some really granular data. In this example, it's an e-commerce platform, and you can even drill down as far as to see the product name. So when you're able to pivot on that kind of data, it's a lot easier to troubleshoot reliability or one-off issues. And then logs. I had ChatGPT write this for me. I asked what it was like to use logs to try to troubleshoot active production issues, and this is what it said, and I thought it was kind of funny. Although it also sort of looks like a t-shirt that Facebook would try to sell you. But I left it in there anyways because it's kind of funny. I've spent a lot of time trying to use logs to troubleshoot and resolve issues, and it sucks. Right? Like, you know the data's in there somewhere, but it's so time consuming, it can be so frustrating, and you may not have access to the logs. You might have to ask somebody else, or it might be in another part of the system, or they could be gone, you know, and it can just be a frustrating experience. So having them in one place where they're usable is really important. So, just a quick recap of that. Don't just amass data, don't be data rich, knowledge poor, be able to answer the right questions to support your system. You can waste a lot of money by buying tools and storing data without having a strategy. You're going to get sick of all the different tools that you try out. There's a lot of them, you know, and you want to be thinking about the right way to do it. And just remember that your team and your system should dictate the approach that you take. So don't just do what you've heard somebody else do. Don't do what your CTO said you did at the last company. You know, think about what will benefit your team and the way you like to work together. So now in the last 5 minutes, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Open Telemetry. It's a project that I love and my company's really bought in on. And I really think it's going to be standardizing the way telemetry data is collected in the future. I just think this is the future of monitoring. So just a little bit about Open Telemetry. Visit this is their website. It's awesome. There's tons of data on there. There's samples and instrumentation information. They have a super active community Slack. It's the CNCF Slack has lots of OTel channels. But this project is the second most active CNCF project after Kubernetes. So that should give you some sense of the kind of traction that it's getting. Lots of support for this project. Cloud platforms already. Lots of big companies bought in on it. It can be very simple to use. It's obviously vendor agnostic, so you can do what you want with it in the way that you want to, and it can grow with you, which I think is an amazing thing. So just a look at what you get with Open Telemetry. Again, it's about standardizing. So to be able to look at signal data that's coming from different sources and having it in the same structure gives you the ability to correlate things in a way that we haven't been able to do in the past. And for me, that's been my big eye-opener. You know, I can understand what generated a particular log when I'm checking out an error or something like that. And in the past, it was a lot about correlating it because of the time it happened or some information that I have in my head. And this really changes that. So the components of Open Telemetry, you know, cross-language. So you pick your favorite language, and there's probably already support for it. Your favorite technology, probably already support for it. If not, there's ways to make it work. And also very active sync groups, so you can contribute. Just a quick look at what it will take to do auto instrumentation on a Python application. This is again from my company's docs, but just to kind of show you, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You know, you can start with just a little bit and then way deeper as you go. The Open Telemetry Collector is a very powerful part of the Open Telemetry project. It does kind of your data processing, so it will let you, you can stream all of your data through it, you can export it to multiple backends, like my company, or keep it in-house in your infrastructure. And there's different ways that you can deploy it to also automatically collect infrastructure information. So we have it deployed in Kubernetes cluster, and just by doing that, we get information about all of the different pods. So all that metric data automatically captured for us, and we see it in our front end, which is just awesome. So again, just instrumenting something isn't what makes it valuable. So you have to think about what you're going to do with that data. You also want to think about your strategy for what you're instrumenting and how you can do manual instrumentation or auto instrumentation. But OpenTelemetry doesn't come with a strategy for storing or visualizing that data. So those are the things that you have to think about when you want to use it. So great tools out there already, lots of big vendors supporting it, and then also lots of great open source tools that you can use without having to sign up for a service. So I'm going to do one quick kind of real world analogy. I spent a lot of time trying to explain to my husband and my parents what it is I do and what we talk about, and this has been the best way for me to explain it to them in a way where like they sort of get it, I think. And I stole this from my engineering manager with his permission because I felt like it was a really great way to kind of spell this out for people who maybe didn't understand why this is important. So if you're in your kitchen and you're cooking dinner for yourself or your family, you know all of the pieces that have gone into that meal, right? Like if it is burnt, you know it's because the heat was too high and you did that, or something's going wrong with your oven or whatever. But you have purview into everything that's happening. You could potentially know how cold your fridge was, you know when the food was purchased, all of that. This is a very observable system. It's small, and you as an individual human, you know all of it. So when you think about the restaurant industry, why I no longer work in the restaurant industry, because it's super stressful, there's a lot going on. And between the time that your server takes an order, it flows through all the stations in the kitchen, everything's fired, it ends up back on the table. If something's gone wrong, it is really hard to know what happened and what went wrong. And for me, that really paints a picture of when you need observability. Not great observability in any kitchen that I've ever worked in, which is why I won't do it again. But, you know, this is where you need that insight. Like there's multiple steps, multiple people involved. You think of these different stations of services. If nobody's overseeing them, things can just keep going wrong. And if you've ever been in the weeds, you know that it just keeps piling up and piling up and piling up. And if you're not addressing the issues, you end up in a really unfortunate state that it's not a good place to be working in. So one thing I just want you to take away, again, is that observability or enhanced monitoring or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. Just think about whether or not you have the information you need to support your systems. You don't want to be out there in the middle of the night feeling like a lonely person on an island without support. And that data and the way that you collect that data can be what makes your day a little bit better. Thank you.